Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I see we've got some familiar faces here on the line and some new faces as well. So thank you for taking some time out of your day to join today's research briefing, where we'll be talking about building the business case for DAM. My name is Scott Dill. I'm on the business development team here with Real Story Group, and our managing director, Jared Gingras, will be joining us momentarily to walk us through the heart of the presentation. A couple of quick housekeeping items of note here as we get started. We certainly encourage you to ask questions at any point during the presentation, and if you'd like to do so, you can just type those into the questions tab in the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get to those at the end of the session. Also, we'll be sending out the slides from today's meeting to you within the next 48 hours or so, and then for our subscribers on the line, you'll be able to access a recording of the session in your subscriber library. So what we're looking at in terms of an agenda for today's presentation is we're going to walk through a quick overview of Real Story Group and who we are as a company, and then Jared will take you through some reasons that enterprise sometimes skip the business case, what the business case looks like in terms of real life, and some other ways to really get your enterprise to take some action. And then what are the typical costs that are associated with that, along with some limitations that you might include with that. In terms of Real Story Group, we are at heart a research firm. Okay, so what we do is provide analysis of the strengths, but maybe more importantly, the weaknesses of over 150 solutions from 100 vendors in the digital workplace and digital marketing technology sphere. And so folks will subscribe to our research as they look to really discover what's the right fit for their particular needs around digital technology. We also do a select number of consulting engagements throughout the year. Happy to chat with you in more detail about that, but essentially those either take on an on-site one-day workshop. It can be we can be an extension of your team as you go through a technology selection project, and we can also sit with you and discuss your technology roadmap and work with you on developing a strategic game plan moving forward. And finally, if you're looking to really see how well you're doing against your industry peers, we offer a product called Real Score, where you can measure your people, your processes, and your technology and see where you're at, what are some areas of improvement, and how you stack up against your industry peers, and then across all other verticals as well. In terms of our coverage areas, these are the areas that we're providing research right now. As I mentioned, over 150 solutions included within the research, and that includes some open source projects along with some of the key mid-market and regional players that are out there. Today we're going to focus more around the purple line there, digital asset management. And what makes us unique as a research firm and in the analyst world is the fact that we do no work for the vendors that we evaluate. So what that means is we don't speak at their conferences or write white papers for them. And most importantly, there's no sort of quid pro quo where they're providing us with any sort of financial gain for any preferential treatment within the research. Our only focus is on you as a technology user and buyer to guide you to the solutions that are the best fit for your particular needs. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Jared Gingras. Again, he's our managing director. Also, he's the lead author of our research around DAM technology, which certainly encourage you to download a sample of that after the presentation. And we're also excited to announce that Jared and our founder, Tony Byrne, are co-authored a book about the right way to select technology, and that's available for pre-order at the link there at Rosenfeld Media. So Jared, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thank you, Scott, and thank you all for taking some time out of your busy schedules to join us today. We certainly appreciate that. As Scott mentioned, we do have this new book out called The Right Way to Select Technology, and a big part of the foundation of that book is really based on some lessons that we've learned over the years in what we tried to do is codify some of that methodology that we use to work with our company, our clients to select the right technology. And what we call that methodology is something called RSVP, or Real Story Vendor Procurement. And I bring this up today not to say that we're going to go through all these steps today. That's a much longer presentation. But what I wanted to bring up is the first step in any successful technology selection project is that you absolutely have to articulate the business case in some way, shape, or form. Now, whether this takes the form of a real formal business case or it's just documenting why you're doing this, it really doesn't matter in the long run, but it's an important step in this process that we encourage you not to skip. But that said, we see enterprises skipping this step all of the time. And so let's start by talking about some reasons that we've seen enterprises, skip that business case step. So the first reason is that notion that it's so obvious that we need a digital asset management system. I'm sure there's many of you on the lines that say our assets are just a mess. We have digital assets everywhere. We can't get control of them. It's so obvious. We don't need to spend time writing up a business case because everyone knows this is true. I'm sure that's absolutely true, and I'm sure your management would agree with you. However, I can't tell you how many times we get phone calls here at Real Story Group from people saying, hey, can you help us write a business case? And we're like, sure, we'd love to help you with that. But there's only one. But then they add, there's only one challenge here. We already picked the product and implemented the product. But now that people are seeing what this costs and maybe some overruns that were associated with it, people are starting to point the fingers and say, why did we do this? And did we really think about all these costs at the outset? And so oftentimes we're helping organizations put together the business case well after the project is already done, and that's not a fun situation for anyone. So you really want to make sure that you have your business case documented, not only so that you can justify it from the beginning, but when those questions are asked down the line, that you make sure you have some good answers that you can point back to. The other reason that we see some organizations skip the business case step, particularly in the digital asset management arena, is that people often say, well, digital asset management is cheap. We don't really need to go through that big formal process. Well, what we found in our analysis of the marketplace, the damn marketplace is quite a large spectrum of products that vary not only in complexity, not only in their suitability for different use cases, but also in cost. So there are some lightweight digital asset management vendors that have a pretty low barrier to entry in terms of cost, but on the other end of the spectrum, there's some products that range in the millions of dollars, and you need to really go into this with your eyes open. And with any technology, it's more than just the software licenses that we're talking about here. There's a lot of softer costs that we'll talk about. Things like, is your content and assets ready to be managed? Do you have the right intelligent metadata surrounding your content? Do you have the right taxonomies in place? Do you have the right people and the skill sets in place? Do you have the right processes in place? Do you have the right technical implementation skill sets to be successful? So all these things factor in. So digital asset management is not cheap, and so to make sure that you have your eyes open going into any project such as this, it really does make sense to do the business case. And then the final reason I'll say that people often skip the business case is because in some ways they're lying to themselves, or maybe they're afraid of what they're going to find out when they start putting pen to paper and trying to justify new technology. Because with any good business case, what you're really doing here is taking a hard look into the mirror and trying to tell the truth about how ready your organization is in terms of, can you handle this technology? Can you handle it from a cost perspective? Can you handle it from a skill set perspective? Can you handle it from a process and content perspective? So all these things need to come into play, and you need to really, if there's one thing that we recommend to our clients over and over again, is to just be honest with yourselves at this phase. Be honest about what your capabilities are, why you need this new technology, and that's what you really should be trying to prove in that business case. So why should we create a business case? Well, the most obvious is to receive approval and funding. But in addition, there's some hidden benefits here. It really should be your opportunity to truly validate an idea. So while it may seem obvious to you about why you need digital asset management, this is an opportunity to really prove it. It's also your first step in a change management situation where you're able to start to communicate your plan about why you need digital asset management and the benefits that it'll provide. And this is really an important step in the process. It's going to be a long journey here, but this is your first chance to start to communicate this to your colleagues and ultimately, hopefully, improve adoption as you roll this new technology out. But you're also looking to prove a few things. You're looking to prove, why is this needed? What would happen if you actually did nothing? What resources are you going to need? How long is it going to take? What's it going to cost? What's the solution actually look like? And finally, how are you going to measure the results of this endeavor? How are you going to know if this actually is successful? So all these things should play into a really good business case. So let's look at 3 dimensions of a business case, and I'll give you some examples of some real-life examples that we take from some of the work we've done with our clients, and give you some examples of what compelled them ultimately to take action and bring in digital asset management. But those 3 dimensions that we're going to talk about is, number 1, gain greater efficiency, number 2, reduce risk, and number 3, to enhance value. With any good business case, there should be some dimension of one of these, but in many cases, when it comes to digital asset management, we see them business cases written around benefits associated with all 3 of these dimensions. And so let's get into some of the examples. So dimension number 1 is gain greater efficiency. So there's many people in management who approach these digital asset management projects to say, hey, we need to reduce costs because we're going through a lot of unnecessary steps. Let's speed up this process. And this is definitely a compelling argument and a good foundation for some business cases. But I like to caution our clients to say that if you're purely looking at digital asset management from a cost reduction standpoint, you have to also factor the associated costs of new technology and all those softer costs that we mentioned earlier. That it's not just licenses; it's all the surrounding things as well. So from a pure pricing or cost perspective, it might not show the pure benefits immediately. Over the long term, it should, but that's not probably the only reason you're going to stake as the only reason to bring in new technology. But in terms of efficiency, reduced frustration is also a big win here. So if you can think about efficiency, not only about the bottom line dollar value, but also how are you going to be improving the lives of your asset and knowledge workers. That can be a big win when it comes to efficiency cases. So let's talk about some other examples of efficiency. So when we think about efficiency, we often think about speed. And the classic case for digital asset management is that how many times in the course of a day are you looking for a piece of media, whether it's a video or an image that someone needs right now, and they say, I know this exists, can you help me find this? And you go through multiple cycles and cycles and cycles to try to find these images, and sometimes you can find them, but it takes a long time, and other times you can't until you have to start over. So getting the right images to the right people, the right time is one of the most compelling cases to have properly managed assets within your enterprise. Efficiency can also mean breaking down asset silos. So, if you were to visually represent many of your organizations and the assets within your organizations, it might look something like this. You have assets that are stored on desktops, on laptops, on tablets, on your mobile devices, in your email, in your instant messages, in your file shares, up in the cloud, and your document management tools, your collaboration tools in various applications. Assets are everywhere within your organization, and so it's a real compelling business case to say, what if we could break down these silos so that every time we had to go look for something, we didn't have to go to 17 different places. What if we could had one single source of truth, one authoritative repository of our assets, so we always knew how to find them and we could bring them back really quickly. Another aspect of the efficiency case is the ability to eliminate redundancy. So I don't know about you, but with many of the clients that we work with, we see people recreating content and artwork and layouts and slides and presentations and assets all the time. You know, it's that classic case where you go look for something, you know it exists, but you can't find it. It's taking too long, so you just recreate it. And we hear all the time that it's just quicker for me to recreate something than to go find it. And that's unfortunate. You know, we see duplicates of content just proliferating itself within organizations, and then you don't know which one is the right one to use at the next time, because there's multiple versions of these different assets, and that's a common thing. But to be able to again go back to that authoritative repository, to know where something is every time, so that when it comes time to use that asset again, you can get the benefits of reuse as opposed to just recreating the wheel every single time. Another aspect of efficiency is tracking with confidence. I know I'm not alone here, where you produce an asset within your organization and you have various naming conventions that look something like file name underscore final underscore version 12 / underscore really final, this time I mean it final, 6th final, 7th final. We all do this. We're all guilty of this practice. But if you are able to truly track revisions of work in progress assets within a system, with a true audit trail and a true way to roll back to previous revisions, all tied to the single asset, that's a really powerful use case in that you can be confident that you're always working with the last and best final version of an asset. And then from there, to be able to track where it's used, who's using it, and how frequently that asset's being used, that's a really powerful, compelling argument to say how digital asset management technology can help your enterprise. And lastly, when it comes to efficiency, we'll talk about streamlining processes. You know, the work in progress collaboration and review and approval cycle within any organization, it's always inefficient and manual. And you know, this is meant to be a kind of a joke workflow here, but this is actually from a real organization that had a real workflows that look something like this. It's a bit of a spider's web here, but it's not uncommon to have these crazy workflows that are largely managed within email, and not surprisingly, things can go wrong, and it's very easy for things to go wrong when the workflows are this complex and this manual. So streamlining that within a system is extremely powerful when it comes to gaining efficiencies. And you know, sometimes the most compelling arguments for many organizations are, you know, not only just the internal workflows, but what if we extend our workflows, our review and approval workflows outside of our organization? Maybe we have third parties who need to be part of our workflows. Maybe we have legal reviewers that might be inside the organization or outside the organization who need to review things. Getting them within a single system so that they can review, and we can track that review process and have a really solid audit trail of who saw what and who reviewed what. That can be a real compelling efficiency use case. All right, dimension number 2 is risk reduction. So every management team wants to reduce enterprise and personal risk. So a digital asset management system in many cases can be viewed as a bit of a kind of insurance. But of course, systems can introduce new risks, but in many cases we see digital asset management, helping to reduce risk within organizations. So one risk it can help mitigate is the risk of workarounds. We see organizations where employees are walking around with some very important files on flash drives. In one company that we worked with, there was a gentleman who he literally walked around with his flash drive around his neck, and whenever anyone needed something, they went and asked Bob, and Bob came over with his flash drive and gave him the latest and greatest version of this type of file. Now, Bob's flash drive wasn't as stylish as the one on the screen right now. This is a bit of I don't know if people actually wear these things, but I think they actually exist. But you might not have a Bob in your office, but there's still many of us that still carry around flash drives with assets on it, and those can get lost pretty easily and get into the wrong hands pretty easily. But every one of us probably carries a mobile phone in our pocket that in essence serves as a bit of an asset repository. We have emails with attachments and other assets that are stored on our mobile phones, and we are our own drives in and of themselves as we walk around on a daily basis. So again, getting your assets in a authoritative system can help alleviate that need to be emailing around assets all the time. Another risk that we see is constant scrambling and rush jobs. We see organizations all the time looking back to their shipping invoices because they need to get really urgent jobs to third parties or printers or different conferences or shows, and they end up putting them on disk drives. This can be fraught with risk as these things are being shipped around the world, but also the costs can really add up. And maybe a more common way that we see people sending files from person to person is in the cloud. There's no shortage of ways to send files these days using the cloud, but we've heard some real horror stories among our client base who tell us about those people who had the personal drive who put all the company's files on that personal drives and then left the company. You can imagine there's a lot of files that get lost, and companies are in many cases just unsure what is on their systems versus what is out there in some of these third-party sites, and that's a scary thing. But it can make a very compelling case for digital asset management to get all that in a very controlled environment. Similarly, there's the risk of understanding who owns our assets or who really should control our assets. I'm sure many of you work with third-party agencies. We've heard many horror stories of agencies who actually had digital asset management systems on their side of the equation, and so these big enterprises working with these agencies oftentimes don't even have control of their own assets. The assets might live with the agency, and as in the real world, agencies can often change, and we've heard some real examples of enterprises firing an agency and then the agency holding that enterprise ransom for literally millions of dollars to get their assets back. And it was only when the enterprise was able to truly put a digital asset management system in place when they could actually truly start managing their own assets and granting access to their third-party agencies to the DAM system as opposed to vice versa. And then another dimension of the risk argument here is fines. We've worked with many organizations in regulated space where violating usage rights are a big problem. There's many examples in the news that you can look up of pharmaceutical companies using in a non-approved image, on a TV commercial or in a conference booth that could lead to some major regulatory fines. And that's at the worst case. But we work with a lot of organizations in the retail or fashion space where models have contracts, and those contracts are ironclad in that you have to only use those assets that feature those models in certain time frame and certain ways. So it's a very real challenge for many organizations. And then the third dimension is enhancing value. So everyone wants to get as much value as possible out of your assets. You spend a lot of money producing assets. There's a real compelling case to get as much value as possible out of these assets. So one compelling argument that we see all the time is we want to use the assets that we already have to create a new revenue stream. We recently worked with several libraries who, some within within enterprises, and some associated with educational institutes who have tons of assets that they've built up over the years, but now they want to try to monetize them. And we've seen some organizations that already had digital asset management systems in place. This notion of building new revenue streams with the same assets was much easier than those organizations that had those assets scattered across the organization. Adaptability is another way you can enhance value. There's some classic examples of some logo changes on the screen here, but simpler examples are, you want to be able to know where your assets are being used so that if things do change, you can swap them out or pull them down. I give that example of those model contracts, associated with some images of fashion models. If the rights expire, you want to know exactly where everything is used so that you can pull them all down or put something else up. And that type of adaptability is really important. Additionally, consistency across channels is a huge way that digital asset management systems can enhance value. We see digital asset management systems sitting as really the engine of many organizations' marketing technology stacks today. At least the more sophisticated enterprises in the world that we work with, some of the Fortune 100, Fortune 50 clients that we have, are all thinking about DAM as really that fulcrum of their digital marketing technology stack. And the reason for that is because the asset is the fundamental core piece of content that can be then distributed across a number of different channels, whether it's the web, whether it's print packaging, whether it's mobile devices, whether it's partner channels and social and real in-store experiences or out on the road experiences, billboards and signage on trucks and whatnot. For organizations who want to tell stories and have a consistent brand experience across those stories, it is critical that you're managing your assets in a logical and authoritative way. So if those are the three dimensions of business cases, no business case is truly an honest one or a compelling one in my mind if you don't tell the other side don't show the other side of the coin. You can't just take a list of benefits to your management without being realistic about what it's going to cost and what are the other limitations you need to be thinking about. So there's some obvious things like your technical costs and your license costs and your the challenges that it's going to take to integrate into your environment. But there's also some other things like the education needed to get your team up to speed so that they can be successful with new technology. And there's also some other costs associated with just adjusting to new systems. What you're really doing when you bring in new technology to organizations is you're changing the way people work, and that's hard, and that can be costly. So being honest about those things up front is really critical. And so here's a few of the types of costs that we think you should be thinking about as you put your business case together. You know, I mentioned the software, but then you might need hardware in your organization. You might need taxonomy and metadata development. There might be a whole slew of consulting and configuration and customization costs that is associated with it. I mentioned DAM being really the engine of many technology stacks today. Well, what that means is that it is not functioning as a system in and of itself, but in fact it's really integrated with other systems, and that integration can be costly and time consuming. And of course, support and training and ongoing operations, those adjustment costs that we talked about, and content cost itself, just making sure your assets are truly in the right form to be managed. These are all things you need to take into consideration, and the best business cases that we've seen have been a combination of showing how this is going to help, a mixture of those three dimensions that we talked about, as well as an honest look as to what the other side of it, what the cost will be. And if you put that all on paper and make that case, you can really be sure that what you're doing is a worthwhile endeavor. And so with that said, I believe we're just about out of time, and I will leave you with some links here. I'd be glad to hear from you. I'd love to hear your stories about where you're at with on your digital asset management journey. If you're just starting out, if you're thinking about building the business case, if there's any way we can help, just let us know. If you'd like to download a sample of our research, please do. If you're interested in the new book that we just published, The Right Way to Select Technology, you can go to Rosenfeld Media and pre-order a copy for yourself there. But again, here's my contact info. If you have any questions at any time, just feel free to reach out. We'd love to hear from you. So with that, we'll wrap up, and I'll say thank you very much and have a great rest of your day.